Well, welcome everybody. My name is Doug Reeves, and I'm so happy that you were able to join us today. We are incredibly lucky to have a panel today to talk about one of the hottest issues in education, and that's artificial intelligence. I want to introduce my colleagues. First of all, Casey Cook, who has a national reputation for her expertise in English language arts. She'll be joining us as part of the discussion. And to lead us off today, Dr. Pete Ondish, and what Dr. Pete has done is to really advance our thinking about what AI means in the classroom and what it means for the entire educational system. So Dr. Pete, we're very lucky to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Shall I present?
Please.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen.
I'm standing by if you can't, so
Great.
There we go.
Can everybody see that?
Excellent. Thank you, Pete.
All right, of course, of course. So Doug has been gracious enough, and thank you to the CLS team for hosting today. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about artificial intelligence, and especially as it relates to education and our school systems. A little bit of a quick kind of background about me, and can you guys see the new slide, slide number 2 for me? Beautiful. So I guess a quick kind of introduction about me and kind of what I do and why I'm here. I'm the co-founder and chief scientist of Blue Fox Labs AI LLC. We're an AI and analytics consulting and implementation company. So we help provide realistic visioning of what AI is and what it isn't. And then we help make that kind of real for businesses or organizations and then meaningful for the people who use them. I'm also a senior research scientist at the University of Illinois, where I work on a lot of projects related to community engagement and how communities work with technology. I am an associate here with Creative Leadership Solutions, and I'm also a fellow at the Pro Social Design Network, which is a collection of organizations and academics who are interested in trying to make technology work in more pro-social ways. And with that, I would like to kick off by talking a little bit more about what exactly is artificial intelligence. A lot of you guys have probably heard some similar terms kind of used interchangeably, but I thought what would be a good use of our time before we kick off today is just kind of go over what some of these basic terms are and how they relate to each other. And so I thought maybe you guys have heard terms like large language models, generative AI, and ChatGPT. A really useful way to think about these 3 separate terms are that large language models are kind of the core technology of generative AI products like ChatGPT. So to make it into a more digestible metaphor, you can think of it like this. Large language models are these engines. They're kind of like the internal combustion engine in terms of their novelty and their power as a technology that can really kind of drive change and just be useful in a market, right? Now, that core technology of the large language model is what sits inside a kind of product that we all kind of use and are familiar with, like a car. In this case, we call that product generative AI. So the way that generative AI works, the things that can write copy and create documents and write code, generate images, the way that those cars or those products works is through the technology of the large language model. And then obviously we have a bunch of different companies that are creating different types of generative AI products. And these are very much like the make, like Ford or Hyundai or Toyota. They're building these different types of cars. So ChatGPT, the example that we all are kind of very familiar with, that was released late in 2022, is just one flavor of car, just in the same way that Ford is different from Toyota. And so OpenAI has a version, and Google has a version called Gemini. Microsoft has a version called Copilot, and there will be many, many more to emerge in the coming years. But this is just kind of a basic way to think about these terms that I feel like we oftentimes throw around and sometimes have a difficult time placing. People often want to understand though, like this large language model that we're dealing with, what exactly is it? Like what goes into it and how does it work? And I'm just going to provide a couple quick slides to try to make sense of it. The primary concept behind these large language models is that they take words and they kind of situate them in these really complex 1,000-dimensional spaces where they can kind of see the spatial relationships between the words. This is kind of a strange concept for a lot of us because we're used to thinking about words qualitatively. We read them on a page, we think about them as people, and it's kind of difficult to think about how words relate to each other numerically. But in terms of when you see this word, you see this word to follow, how does this word kind of relate to this word? This is kind of a revolutionary concept that allows us to kind of map in a space how words relate to one another. And so there was actually a really revolutionary paper that was distributed at a conference. I'm actually just going to skip to showing you the picture of that. That talked about in 2015 the idea that, hey, we can actually take some of these associations that we see between words and we can map them into theoretical space. And when we do this, we get things like king minus man plus woman equals queen. You kind of see how these words relate to each other, and it makes intuitive sense. If I have a king and I subtract the man part and I add the woman part, I get the queen part. But once we found the way to kind of mathematically do this, it opened up the doors to do all kinds of different computations in terms of when you get this word and then you put this word next to it, what's the most likely word to come after that? When this technology was first created, this idea of vector space and the computations that come with them, a lot of people, and specifically at the conference when this research paper was presented, were really kind of up in arms. Like, how are you doing this? Like, what kind of magic are you doing? Like, this doesn't seem real or possible. It was, for even 10 years ago, a really revolutionary thing. But from this vector space came all of the applications that we're seeing in large language models in generative AI products today. So what is generative AI actually? Is it like, some kind of super intelligent, all-knowing artificial brain? Well, no, actually, it's not at all. All that it is these different transformers that are looking at in vector space. And a transformer is just, here's all of these different words. I'm going to transform it into this dimension where I can map the words out next to each other. All it is that plus, here's a solution I generated with the transformer. Is it right or wrong? And then just constantly reinforcing. So you've probably used, or you might have used, a generative AI product before, like ChatGPT. And you'll notice that when you use this product, it gives you the option to thumb up or thumbs down the solution that it gives you to your question. All that it's doing is just trying to learn, am I going in the right direction with my computations, or am I getting further away from it? These two fundamental processes, taking the words, putting them into a space, and then generating solutions that you tell me I'm getting warmer or I'm getting colder, is kind of the backbone behind all of this generative AI technology that we see today. So the vector space and what goes into it is a really important part of how GPT works. The vector space is really expensive to build and it takes a really long time. And it's one of the reasons why if you ask ChatGPT newer questions, sometimes it still tells you, hey, I'm only up to date for 2022. They've got improvements and they're going to be constantly adding new words to this vector space. But basically, the vector space is made up of large corpuses of publicly accessible data. So it basically just does a common crawl of everything on the web from the last 10 years. It compiles a ton of conversational data from Reddit. It also looks at, I think, every English language article on Wikipedia. And it kind of uses all of these as data to create that vector space of how words relate to each other in a quantifiable way. That's really kind of the magic behind GPT. So with this in mind, what is GPT actually good at? Well, it's really good at drafting documents, code, images, basically things where we need to predict what words should be put together after another word comes in. So we see a lot of the ChatGPT kind of, hey, give me an article that talks about this, and it produces the entire article for you. It's a little bit easier to understand how it does something that computationally intense if you can kind of wrap your head around something a little bit more simple, which is just autotype. In autotype, you're writing a few different words out in a sentence. And you've probably seen autotype in Microsoft Word documents or in your email when you're typing emails, super, super common everywhere, right? You type a few different words, And then GPT after a while, or the AI product after a while, can kind of predict what your next words are. And you might find that oftentimes they're right. Sometimes they're wrong, but oftentimes they're right. And essentially all that it's doing is looking at the words you produce in sequence and then saying, hey, I see that you put roses are red, violets are, and I know that historically, every time I've seen this in my corpus of different words, the word that comes after that is blue. Did you mean blue here? And it's just doing that with every other word that it could possibly do in a more complicated way by looking at thousands and thousands of relationships. That's the basic idea though. So GPT is really good at drafting documents, code, images, where it can kind of draw on all of that historical information and produce kind of the average thing. Hey, this is what's most likely in this situation. This is what people typically say here. This is the most commonly said here. So it's really good at doing these kinds of preliminary draftings. And for that, it can save time and money and kind of promote some creativity when you need it to generate certain ideas that combine different elements. Very good at that. One of the things that's also really beautiful about ChatGPT is that it provides this really, really contextualized matching. So unlike with Google, where you can put in, a certain search or some information into it and say, I want to find what people are saying about this. You might not be able to find anything that directly matches your context, but ChatGPT, kind of drawing from all of that knowledge that it has, is able to actually create really, really hyper-specific things that match what you're looking for. So you can put in very specific situations, times, contingencies, and get really, really specific answers back. You can ask it, for example, to describe World War II in the language of RuPaul. And it's a really funny thing because it'll say, oh, honey, World War II in the 1930s were a hot mess full of lots of riot, and it will give you this really flamboyant, like interesting kind of tone because it's saying, hey, I know that when RuPaul talks, these are the kinds of ways people talk. And I know that World War I is actually about all of these things, and this is what people talk about. And all that it's doing is compiling those. The really nice thing is that what it creates is something very, very contextually specific. So you can give it very specific things and you get very specific output. So it's really, really great for that. It's also really good at translating. I mean, in a very basic sense, you put in one language, it gives you another language. You can put something in a computer programming language and it can give it to you in a different computer programming language, all again, doing the exact same thing, nothing different. And you might have noticed that all of these generative AI products came out at exactly the same time that do documents, that do images, that do video. And it's because they're all using the same fundamental technology. There's nothing inherently very different about what is going on behind the curtain. It's just a difference in what the technology is being applied to. So anyway, it works really well with human languages, translating between technical and non-technical things. What is GPT not good at? And we're going to wrap up here and then move to some of the panel questions that we've had. GPT is still not really good, and generative AI in general, not really good at things that require extreme accuracy. By definition, remember what these generative AI products are doing. They're looking at their entire knowledge set, all of the words that we've given them, and then we're saying, given these words, what's the most likely outcome for what comes next? By definition, these products are giving you averages. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're very good at giving you things that are very, very, very specific and correct under lots of different situations and under very specific contingencies. They can guesstimate, but if you need to be very, very accurate, GPT is oftentimes not going to do it. GPT is also, by definition, not going to have a very deep understanding of relationships, emotions, historical context that are required for many fields like public relations. And I know people who are in the public relations industry, and the kinds of responses that generative AI products give to some of their questions just don't work, because these products don't understand how to manage these different relationships, how these relationships have history, the way in which very, very, very specific words need to be crafted for these very specific emotions and social situations. Really just not good at that. It can give you a draft, but it still really struggles with that, and it always will struggle with that. GPT finally is also not particularly good with highly specialized knowledge fields. And the reason for this is that these products are drawing from large corpuses where there's lots of information and lots of predictive ability, right? It's heard the phrase, roses are red, violets are, for so long that it can predict with a lot of accuracy what that last word is because it's seen it many, many times. But if you were the first person in a specialized field of poetry to write roses are red, violets are blank, GPT wouldn't be able to fill in the answer for you. And you see this in a lot of tasks when you try to ask GPT or OpenAI to, really flesh out like a very specific issue that's happening at a very specific time, because maybe there's only a few people writing about that. And it can't really generate reliable estimates in that very specific field. So I use GPT to get suggestions for writing papers or for how to phrase certain things. But if you ever ask it, like, write me a paragraph about how in the 1900s, the US economy shaped climate change as it specifically relates to industries related to food and restaurants. Like, it really struggles with that, and it won't. It'll give you a bunch of stuff that are kind of off topic, because you're looking for something very specific that not a lot of people are actually writing about. And finally, GPT is really bad with security and privacy. Everything that you put in to ChatGPT goes to OpenAI. So you obviously don't want to be putting in private and sensitive information. Now, there are a few products that are coming down the line from Microsoft and from Google that will eventually allow you to interact with a GPT product, but in a very privacy secured, like securing way where that information is not going to their internal systems. But those are, I think, a little bit down the line, and you're gonna have to pay a decent amount of money for those, right? So for the rest of us who just want to use it, like, why is it such a pretty cheap resource for us to use? In part because they're kind of getting data and information and knowledge from us as we do it, much in the same way that Google did when it came out with Google search.
Yes.
So these are just some basics of what is this kind of new OpenAI, generative AI technology? What is it good at? What is it not good at? And I think with that understanding out of the way, it would be really good for us to kind of move on to some of the questions from some of the participants. We got some of the responses from the registration for this event, and there were some really, really great questions. So we're really hoping to replicate some of that conversation here today.
So Dr. Pete, I'm going to start, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Casey Cook. But I just want to say, for the record, I really appreciate you acknowledging the weaknesses. What so many people focus on is, AI is like the Wizard of Oz, and it's magical. And I really appreciate the fact that you talked about what it doesn't do very well. I'll just tell you a personal story, and that is that I asked ChatGPT to write my obituary, and I was kind of insulted because it was not nearly as flattering as I thought it was supposed to be. And what it revealed is, when it scrapes everything off the internet, it is not discriminatory. It doesn't give you the filter that I would have preferred. And so I think and the educational implication of that is that we really have to be very careful consumers of what we see, because it's not, it's not like a funnel that comes down to here and has the good stuff at the end. It's just the funnel that starts up here and is still the same width of the funnel at the end. So I just want to appreciate the fact that you helped articulate those weaknesses. But I also think that's an implication for education. You mentioned having students write. So I know we have questions to get to, but I want to invite Casey to jump in, because we know that student writing is one of the most important things that they can do to improve reading comprehension. And the biggest threat is if students substitute ChatGPT or any other AI generator for their own writing, they're going to miss something. So Casey, let me let you jump in here.
Well, Dr. Reeves, thank you. And Dr. Pete, thank you so much. I want to address what you just said, Dr. Reeves, but before I do, I want to say to Dr. Pete that as I was listening to you present, I thought to myself, it is so critical that teachers understand how AI works, and it's so informative to listen to you explain the relationships and word patterns and how programs or platforms like ChatGPT work, I think that's how we start with building confidence and commitment in the classroom is professional development and making sure that teachers have access to that kind of information so that they understand what they're dealing with and how to use it in the classroom with confidence. And this is really helpful for me, and I hope and I feel sure that our viewers and our participants feel the same. One thing, Dr. Reeves, we've noticed in our field is when we see teachers being confident with using artificial intelligence in the classroom to help support student writing, one of the things that we notice is that they're doing a really good job of having students do the writing in the classroom. And I know that's something that we talk about. Teachers are supporting the writing process, but then students enter their writing into ChatGPT, for example, or some other similar artificial intelligence platform. And then students are publishing what they get from that submission. And then I've seen some of those publications, on display in schools, for example, and in the hallways. And I think that's a great start, but I think a critical piece that we're missing is the opportunity to teach our students how to notice what changed in the writing. What did they ask the computer? What did they ask the program? What did they ask the platform to do with the piece of writing? And what did they notice was different about it when they got their product? And then having students reflect on that piece and say, perhaps compare and contrast what you initially put in, what did it give you? And one of the great things about that is it becomes a very individualized instruction for students. It really meets them where they are when they put their writing into ChatGPT, for example. And I know there's several programs that teachers use, but I'll just say that's just one example. They can really differentiate for students and groups, and what they're putting into ChatGPT is very individualized based on what they get out and what they notice. And it really helps teachers take students from where they are to where they want them to go next with that individual feedback.
That's such a thoughtful point, Casey, because too often in schools we prize the first draft, and I've written a bunch of books and articles. I've never had the first draft of anything accepted. It's all about editing and revision, and about saying, here's my first draft, and then getting, pummeled by the editor, and then how do you make it better? So one of the most thoughtful uses of ChatGPT or any other AI platform is to say, okay, that's the first draft. Now, how do I, as a student, make it better and better and better? So, Lisa or Dr. Pete, are there? Let's hear from our participants. What are some other questions that you're getting?
I would like, I'm
oh,
sorry.
Go ahead, Evelyn.
I would like to hear more about this, Casey, about how they put the writing in to the ChatGPT, their own writing, and what they do with that, because I teach writing to English learners. And I think it's something that could be really useful, but I'm hesitant to use ChatGPT because I don't want them to rely on it too heavily. So I would like to know more. I'd like to know more about how I could use it effectively in the classroom, because sooner or later they're going to discover it and use it, and probably not very effectively to improve their learning. So I'd like to find a way to teach them to use it as a tool, not as the be all and end all.
I think that's a great question too, Evelyn. One of the first things that comes to mind is playing with it yourself while you look through the lens of a student. So for example, if you take a piece of your student's writing and you put that writing, copy paste into ChatGPT, and through the lens of your student, thinking about what you might ask your student to do. What would you want your student to do? Perhaps improve the writing for flow, or check the writing for grammatical errors, or something, some kind of request like that. And then notice what product you get back from that. I think that's where I would start as an educator. And what's been really helpful to me is to just play around with these tools to see what I can ask it to do and what it does with the product that I give it. And that helps me feel more confident with what I'm asking students to do. And then I know what to expect, or I have a better expectation of what they're going to get in a response. And so I've seen some teachers having students do their writing, perhaps in a Google document, and then pasting that writing or a paragraph into ChatGPT or a similar platform, and asking very specific questions that are unique to that student's individual level. So depending on what that student needs, where that student needs to grow, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and you know your students best. That's that human element piece that, you know, we'll always need. So we don't have to worry, I think, about artificial intelligence replacing teachers, because we have that relationship and we know our students. And so when you have your students put their writing into a similar AI platform, you can give your students guidance on what exactly you want them to do. Where do you want them to grow along that progression or that spectrum of growth with their writing? And that can inform the prompt that goes into ChatGPT. And then the student would be able to work with that response to improve the writing, or to acknowledge or notice what was done differently to his or her piece of writing that improved it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Casey.
I want to follow up. That was an excellent answer from Casey. I don't think there's much I can really add to it, but I really like some of the school state level suggestions of how to integrate generative AI into the classroom. And in particular, I'm a fan of North Carolina's. I feel like they did a very good job of providing concrete recommendations that teachers can use. And one of them is that they ask students to reflect on different stages of how GPT had changed their answers from step 1 to step 2 to maybe step 3 in the writing process. Now, once we think about writing prompts like this, there's no longer an opportunity for students to just wholesale, outsource their work to ChatGPT, right? They have to think critically about what's happening step by step. I find suggestions like that to be very helpful. And another thing that I feel like North Carolina does very well is provide guidelines for clear communication around acceptability of AI in certain tasks. So making clear to students that, hey, this is a task that I want you to use ChatGPT, to this extent for. I want you to use it to create a draft, but I don't want you to use it to actually create the final product. And they provide a rubric for different levels of involvement and integration into the different assignments. And I think that's a really useful thing. So students aren't saying, well, I can use ChatGPT because they didn't tell me how much I can and can't use it. Or, the teacher is not really acknowledging it, so I'm just going to use it and get away with it, right? I think a forward approach that acknowledges the tool exists, while providing clear guidelines for the expectation of how it's going to be used, gives students a framework that they can actually implement.
Well, and Dr. Pete, I just want to acknowledge, I think you've hit on the essential issue that I just read a survey this week that 2/3 of teachers do not want to use it because they're concerned about the ethical implications. And the way to
Alert from low battery.
and the way to get around the ethical issues is that we say, look, submit 2 drafts. The first draft was ChatGPT. Here's the second draft, how I improved it. But Lisa, I don't want to ignore our participants, so please guide us to paying attention to them.
Right, of course. I've dropped a few of our the input that we've gotten from our registrations. The most recent one is from educator Reyes. Thank you for joining us from CSLA at Leading for Equity. Nice background. He shares how has ChatGPT been effectively used with students with disabilities and IEP development? Great question.
Well, I'll try to speak to that question. That's not an area that I get to observe that I get to observe very often in my work, but I do hear a lot of conversation about it. And I think that goes back to knowing what's in the IEP to inform what you might consider asking students to do with it. What are their growth points? What are they working on instructionally? And how can you use ChatGPT as almost like a co-teacher? And one of the things I would recommend, again, is similar to what we were talking about with Evelyn, with practicing as a teacher, using that tool through the lens of your students who have IEPs or learning disabilities, and play around with the types of prompts that you can ask ChatGPT based on the student's IEP and see what kinds of feedback or what kinds of responses that you get. Again, it's a way to individualize instruction, but I would encourage you to practice with it, using the information and the requirements in the IEP to help you prepare to use that instructionally.
Thank you, Casey. Just for those who don't know you like I do, could you please share your background, and then we'll move on to the next question from a participant.
Sure. I am a former ELA teacher, English Language Arts. Also taught social studies early on in my career, but English Language Arts for the most part. And then I moved to the district level and supported English Language Arts across our district and supported instruction. And then I moved to the state level and I support English Language Arts from a state perspective, along with social studies and world languages.
Great. Thank you, Casey. So Will asks, is there a universal way for students to cite their AI sources?
That's a great question.
Is to encourage transparency in utilizing this tool. That's a great question. Doug, the writer, the Mr. 45 Books and Counting, does your Zillow track AI sources?
Yeah, for any of you who are writing articles or books, or particularly those of you who are working on dissertations, the easiest and safest way is Zotero, Zotero. It's free. Zotero.org will automatically cross-reference every blog post, every article, every book that you cite, and it not only avoids any hint of plagiarism, but also saves you hours and hours of time in your reference source. Dr. Pete may have more to add about that, but I will tell you, I've advised a lot of doctoral candidates, and it is a lifesaver.
Yeah, Zotero is awesome.
Yeah, no, guys, is that well, I'm sorry for the informality, but colleagues, is that appropriate? Is that an appropriate resource for students? And I guess also another question is it a free resource?
Lisa, I have to tell you this great story. I was visiting this elementary school, and in a third grade classroom, not only were these students doing wonderful writing, but they also cited sources, and they had footnotes. And I went up to this girl and said, Samantha, I'm so impressed that you are citing your sources, and I really appreciate that. And she looked at me sternly and said, we don't do plagiarism at this school. So even elementary kids can cite sources, can avoid plagiarism, and they understand what it is. Conversely, I've been in secondary schools where they literally don't know what plagiarism means. And so it's fallen upon me to say, look, if I broke into your locker and stole your stuff, you wouldn't like that, would you? No. Well, when you steal my words, because I'm a writer, that's stealing my stuff. So we all have an obligation to talk honestly and openly about what plagiarism is. And I think ChatGPT and every other AI makes that a temptation that imposes on us an obligation, not just to talk about how artificial intelligence is easy, but also talk about how to use it ethically. And that's the big challenge that awaits us in the future.
Great, Pete. I sensed you were wanting to share your experience.
I was going to say the Zotero is amazing. I use it for everything that I use too. As far as I know, like there's not concrete guidelines around citing information that comes from ChatGPT. I think it's really kind of the discretion of the institutions right now. My guess is there will be something a little bit more uniform down the line, but I think the common practice right now is to ask ChatGPT to get you the sources, like the original sources itself, and then for the author to go back and check those sources. So to the question about citing, never really a good idea to cite ChatGPT like as an entity, just in the same way that you wouldn't cite Google as the place you got the information, right? You want to go to the original source.
Exactly.
Good point. So, and the concerns and or questions that came in from our participants, I'm wondering, as we are very cognizant of leadership, leadership burnout, leadership turnover, aspiring leaders, filling that critical role so that is spearheads all the initiatives going on in the district and the schools. What are there any special considerations or impacts that of the work of the school principal and or superintendent or district leadership where they could see this as to take advantage of to save them time, as well as teachers, and or things that they should be aware of?
Well,
So
I'll take a
Doug?
crack and then let me defer to Dr. Pete.
And Pam
I
could join us from a assistant superintendent. So after you, Doug, Pam will be on.
Okay, just a first crack. Low level things like agendas for cabinet meetings, agenda for board meetings, the way that we distribute information that will save people time. I think AI is a great use of time to save people time, avoid death by PowerPoint, avoid all the stuff ordinarily happens in cabinet and board meetings. However, there's a difference between presentation, which ChatGPT can do, and deliberation and inquiry, which it can't do. So what board members and our superintendents and senior leaders need to do is to distinguish between delivery and deliberation. And delivery is fine. AI can do delivery. But what our senior leaders need to do is to say, so what about deliberation and inquiry? That's something that humans need to do. And Dr. Pete, I'll defer to you on.
Oh, thank you, Doug. I was going to Pam Gildersleeve Hernandez, who's actually an associate with us, who's a standing assistant superintendent. I would love to hear Pam's perspective on how she uses AI and her perspective as being a practitioner in the field in K-12 education. And then
Thank
Pete
you.
will pass on you. And then Casey.
Thank you, Lisa, and hello, everyone. One of the things we've started using ChatGPT for is writing our board updates, and we have done some intentional planning around that and playing with it. And one of the beautiful things about a new tool is that you can use the opportunity to bring together a team to play as we learn, and that also gives us the experience of how we're going to teach our students with this. So, for example, ChatGPT, please write a board update on LPAC testing. And it spits out this whole wonderful script that has a lot of flowery language in it. So you do have to go back in and edit and add details that are specific to your district, to your situation, but it gives a very nice outline and sounds professional. And then as a team, you can also speak with one voice in what you present in your writing, right? So I will say though, flowery language, you do have to proofread, you do have to add your own voice to it, and also take a look at the formatting. ChatGPT has a very specific type of formatting, and that if you don't remove the formatting, it will be very clear that you used a support tool in its place. For smaller school districts, when emergency communications have to go out, and you may or may not have a public information officer, it can be, an example would be, student brought a toy gun to school for an elementary school, right? ChatGPT, please write a parent community letter to notifying that a third grader or a student brought a toy gun to school. And then again, go in, update it with information in specific language that brings your voice to it, and remove the formatting. And you very quickly have something that's professional and concise to send out.
Well said.
Thank you so much, Pam. Appreciate you fitting this into your day. Pete and then Casey, what do leaders need to be aware of?
I'll actually let Casey go. I'm going to finish up a thought that I have percolating from Pam's suggestion there.
Thanks, Pete.
Well, I think Pam raises several great points. And I love the point, Pam, that you have to watch out for the formatting because it can give you away. But again, I agree. You mentioned the flowery language, for example. One thing that you can do with that is to tailor what you're asking in the tone that you want the response, which is one of the fun things to do if you want to just play around with it. So for example, if you are, if you're collecting feedback from your staff and they are requesting professional development around a certain topic, and you know something about it, but you don't have your thoughts together just yet. And so you can ask ChatGPT to help you. What do I need to know or do to prepare professional development around this topic? And then it will sometimes give you responses in, you know, using verbose language, and you can say regenerate without verbose language, and it can help you narrow it down. So it's a great tool. It's a great thinking tool. So I always remind those that I work with that, you know, it's ChatGPT isn't really that magical. It's not going to give you the agenda. It's not going to give you the answer. It's not going to really write the PD. You've got to first feed the information, and it just does a great job of organizing, as Pete talked about when we were, you know, first coming on together, that organizing the relationships of the words and the request, and then giving you something that you may find useful. And like you said, Pam, it's something that you can start with. It's a starting place to play with to then further develop your product, whether it's an agenda, whether it's just an outline for professional development, or even a memo.
Yeah, you made me laugh, Casey, because I'm in a book club where I feel like I have to have, you know, one hand on the book and the other hand on the dictionary to figure out what the author was saying. Because I'm a relatively well-read guy, but I didn't understand all the words on every single page. So thanks for the laugh I needed today.
Thank you, Casey. Great suggestions. Pete.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up. I dropped the link in the chat here. In line with this idea of prompting ChatGPT to speak in certain ways, and actually kind of similar to Jojo's question about how do we use ChatGPT to not only help students with disabilities, but with individualized education plans. There is an emerging art around prompt engineering of here's the way that I ask a question to get the right answer back to me. And part of that is telling it not only what you want to know, but what kind of voice do you want it in? What the audience is for it? And what are the particular parameters around what an acceptable answer is, be it in terms of length? So, you know, you do it in 2 paragraphs, do it in a page. So there's a whole kind of emerging art around this, and there's lots of guides. I just posted one that I found online that I thought was a pretty good one, but there are lots of different prompt engineering kind of templates of like, do this, you know, include information about the speaker and the audience and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of that good stuff out there. Highly recommend just using that to greatly enhance any of your prompt engineering capabilities. Right now, the second thing that I want to say is, right now, a lot of us interface with these generative AI products just through like the portal of OpenAI or through Google's like Gemini. In the future, a really common product that I think we're going to start seeing is something called RAG, or Retrievement Augmented Generation. The idea behind RAG is that we're going to take the stuff in GPT and we're going to take your private database. And it's going to be able to access the information in a private database as well as the information in GPT. So let's suppose that you had a history of different files from your school that you wanted to help GPT understand the language and the situations of. And so right now, ChatGPT can't handle all of those really specific details. But if you were to be able to augment ChatGPT with, let's say, all of the different like board and conversation notes of your school's meetings, then ChatGPT would have a pretty good understanding of like different people and what they say and the language that you want to use. And these are products that aren't really available yet, but I would anticipate in around 3-ish years down the line, I think Microsoft is really going to start pushing these kinds of industry and organization specific tools that allow you to be very, very context specific to like your district or your school. We're not quite there yet though. So in the meantime, we just got to work OpenAI's ChatGPT the best we can.
Great. Thank you, Pete. Will, I just wanted to double check if you wanted to unmute that we answered your question, and I believe I did, but I don't want to assume. So did we answer your question of, is there a universal way for students to cite AI sources?
Absolutely, you did. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the very thoroughness in which we got. Yes, I'll do it. So thank you.
Hey, it's like, don't do it. That's what I goes back to credible sources. All right. Thank you, Will. Thank you for unmuting. At this point, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, because I know everyone has had a long day. We've had a robust conversation. We have about 10 more minutes where we'll open it up. We had many questions and concerns come in. We've addressed many of them. But I would like to open it up for folks to, let's see, we have about 43 people on this. And please feel free to unmic and ask our panelists questions or share your experiences for the last 10 minutes before we call it a Tuesday and start for midweek. We're all going to do that teacher pause time. So, and otherwise I will throw in questions that came in from the panel.
Please do.
Lisa, while you're exploring the chat for questions, I'm going to go back and touch on something that Dr. Pete mentioned a moment ago when you were talking about prompting. And that brought us back to one of the questions early in the session when we were talking specifically about student writing. And you reminded me with your response that when we're prompting, that's one of the ways that we can really tailor instruction. For example, how can I strengthen my writing as an argumentative piece? Or, what can students can put their writing into AI and ask it, is this persuasive? What recommendations can you make? How can I strengthen my argument? Or how can I develop my narrative? And those are the types of questions that teachers can play with when you put writing and prompts into ChatGPT and to see what it will give you in preparation for asking students to do that, and then noticing what AI gives the student back that's different than what they put in.
That is such an incredibly thoughtful insight. And I'll tell you one thing that I heard a teacher say this week, and that was ask ChatGPT, what's the other side of the argument? Because students tend to be very averse to conflict, and they all want to be on the same side. But if we really want to develop their critical thinking skills, they have to ask themselves, how could I be wrong? What's the other side of the argument? And you may not get a classmate to do that, but you can definitely get ChatGPT to do that. And that alternative thinking is really important for our students.
Great point.
Clayton, and I know Carlos, go ahead. Carlos, go ahead. And then Clayton mentioned something in the chat.
I'm sorry, I can't hear. No, I have artillery ears. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
How about now?
Oh, perfect. There you go.
Yeah. Not good if I can't find that button on a technology webinar, right? So how about different, I know we've been talking about prompting for writing, Chat GPT in particular. What about other methods of multimedia expression, like generating pictures or generating videos? I'm looking at using this for maybe assemblies and video scripting, and hiring a video editor can be very expensive, time consuming. Video editing itself can be very time consuming. What about in that areas, multimedia expression?
Lisa, do we have Amanda on this call? If what I want to offer you to do is connect you with Amanda, who is brilliant at doing precisely what you said, generating these vivid visual images that really makes these things come alive, and you don't have to pay $1,000 to do it. So maybe we can hook you up with her, because she's brilliant.
Yeah, she's our instructional design. So, and yep, there I put her email in there. I don't know, Pete, if you want to respond to that from your experience with AI.
I think that Carlos, what's your concern? Like, is it how to use it for those things?
So I know Chat GPT, I'm not sure if it's the paid version, has other modes there, like a video sort of and I just prompter, I guess you can call it, or a way to engineer ideas for video. I'm looking for different, I guess, is there anything other than that? Or I'm trying to generate pictures or images, maybe come up with a school logo. I'm like,
Yeah.
not out there.
Well, I'll say that ChatGPT and the OpenAI products, and I think from the other ones pretty soon, I think the Sora is the name of its video creation engine, but ChatGPT can do images pretty well. I think that what you're going to find is a lot of in the same way that digital print created kind of a new canvas for people to kind of do the same type of work they've been doing. OpenAI and generative AI products are going to do that for images and for video. So you can create video and you can create images actually pretty easily. It's just going to take a lot of like that refining, and it's going to kind of, I think, require people to, I think it's going to like allow for the creation of kind of a new genre of music, just in the same way that, you know, like electronic music could become a thing once we had the technology to kind of add this new flavor to typical guitar and bass and drums. It's going to be like a really interesting and kind of exciting thing to see like what kinds of art people create with it. And I think the other really cool thing I think that everybody's mentioned is it's going to greatly reduce the barriers to getting into that art, just in the same way it's reducing the barriers to coding and programming, so that somebody who's generally interested in art, but, you know, really struggles with, you know, doing the technical things and the pointing, the clicking and the programming, like they're going to find ways to do that and do it in a lot more effective ways and easier ways. And then as far as image generation, I mean, you can do lots of image generation right now with ChatGPT. The company that I work for, that I co-founded, we created a logo with ChatGPT. We're like, create like a fox that's blue and it looks like this. And we just kind of did a couple iterations and we said, boop, we're done. So that was really cool. And it just kind of lowered the barrier for us to get involved with that. So I think it's a really cool and exciting thing. All the tools are there. But Carlos, I feel like maybe I also didn't really answer your question. But if I didn't, please let me know.
You did. Thank you.
Carlos, you're welcome to follow up with Amanda, and you have my contact information from and you'll get it from the follow-up from the webinar. So feel free to reach back out. We had a great question about what grade levels are most students using AI, and how do we prepare the lower grades? Two powerful questions.
I'm seeing at the primary level, you know, second and third graders are doing it, and when this gets to a real ethical issue of homework, when, you know, wealthy families have internet connectivity and AI awareness, and poor families do not. That creates a huge gulf. And so I think we need, there was just an article I cited this week that I think we really have to be aware of the fact that low-income families do not have access to this, and it's something that we have to ethically consider as educators.
I do have one more question, since I don't know if we have a little bit of time. The ability to write a story or a novel. I heard that somebody had written a book in over a weekend and got it published through Amazon's publishing services or whatnot. Or I should say co-author a story, right? If you're prompting it. Is that going to, I don't know, devalue the books? Like you're going to question every time you're reading a book, was this prompted by AI? Is this something that was a human?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
that's part of what the writer's strike was all about, is making sure that publishers do not use AI to substitute for what human writers do. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I would comment on that, Carlos, it's something that's on everybody's mind about how we're going to integrate and what kind of ways in which the technology is going to change our perceptions of what's valued. And you don't need to be an economist to know that when something becomes very easy, then it becomes much less valuable, right? Like books are really valuable because they're really hard to write, and they take a lot of energy and creativity and brilliance to do so. And if anybody can just write a book, then all of a sudden it's not so valuable anymore. I think that there's going to be an inevitable kind of changing where the art is going to change of writing and content creation to kind of incorporate these kinds of things. And you're going to see kind of a rescaling of, hey, you know, this used to be like a really valuable thing before, but now it's really valuable when it has these kinds of accents and flavors and personal touch to them. There's a lot of people who are also saying that we're going to, because of this, see sort of a renaissance in in-person related activities, because it's one thing that you really can't fake or automate away. And something that we kind of all know is true and authentic. And the other thing, though, is that these technologies are still not very good. And I'm not particularly convinced they're going to be good soon at creating content that's really as marketable and valuable as what a person can create, because the person has so much more understanding of the nuance and the context, and it can't really hit the right notes. The difference between a good book and a great book, oceans. ChatGPT can give you an average book, and it's going to be a long time before it can give you a great book.
Yeah. It was the best of times and the worst of times, right? that ChatGPT will never do. Well, colleagues, we're at the end of our time. I want to express my deep appreciation to our president, Lisa Almeida, for hosting this, to my colleagues, Dr. Pete and Casey Cook. Thank you so much for your contributions today, and to all of our participants. Lisa, I'll defer to you to the last word.
Of course. Thank you, Doug. Thanks for the robust conversation that we've had and the hour that you've given us. The recording will be sent out tomorrow morning to all the registrations. Angel's going to say a few words, and then Pete, if you would put up our slide. We do, despite putting on these webinars throughout the school year and year, all of our colleagues are available to come out and speak and educate and discuss and listen and coach around this topic. So feel free to reach out to us anytime, and we will follow up with you to see how we could best serve you and continue the conversation. Angel? Thank you, Pete.
I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight on behalf of California ASCD. I really appreciate the discussion around the limitations of AI. That's not something that I had really heard presented, and thank you for sharing how you're using it. As we see this ever expanding tool, I think your input is absolutely essential, and I appreciate you being at the forefront of this for our students. Have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you on our next one, which is on March 12th.
Thanks, California ASCD, for your partnership. We appreciate it.
I will hang on for a few minutes if anyone has any particular questions before I sign off the meeting. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Angel.